In 2018, a passenger fell from a cruise ship into the Adriatic Sea just before midnight, alone, with no one watching. She wasn't found until the next morning, floating nearly 60 miles from where she went in, 10 hours, in open water, at night, and she survived. That single fact should terrify you more than it should reassure you, because for every story like hers, there are far more that end in silence. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happens, procedurally, the moment someone goes overboard from a cruise ship, and by the end of this, you'll understand why the outcome depends on something almost no passenger ever thinks about: how long it takes anyone to even notice you're gone. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. On most cruise ships, if you go over the railing and nobody sees it happen, the ship does not stop. It doesn't slow down. In many cases, it doesn't even know. A ship moving at 20 knots covers roughly half a nautical mile every 90 seconds. So by the time anyone realizes something is wrong, if anyone realizes at all, the vessel could already be miles away, and turning a ship that size around isn't like turning a car. That's the real premise of this entire video, and we'll come back to exactly how far a ship actually drifts before rescue even begins. Let's put the actual scale of this in context. Cruise Lines International Association data covering incidents between 2009 and 2019 recorded 212 confirmed overboard events, passengers and crew combined, across the entire global industry. Of those 212 people, only 48 were ever found alive. That's roughly one rescue for every 4 incidents. Meanwhile, more than 25 million people take a cruise every single year, which means your individual odds of ever going overboard are extraordinarily small, somewhere in the range of 1 in a million. But the moment it does happen, the math changes completely, and suddenly you're not talking about probability anymore. You're talking about minutes, water temperature, and whether a single crew member happened to be looking in the right direction at the right second. Most people assume that if someone falls overboard, the ship's advanced technology and constant surveillance would catch it almost instantly. That assumption is only partially true, and the gap between what people assume and what's actually guaranteed is the most important thing to understand here. Some newer ships are now equipped with motion detection and infrared camera systems specifically designed to detect a body falling past the hull and alert the bridge automatically. But this technology is not universal across the industry, and even where it exists, it only covers certain sections of railing, not the entire ship. On a huge number of vessels sailing right now, detection still depends entirely on a passenger, a crew member, or a security camera operator happening to witness the fall in real time. No witness generally means no alarm, and no alarm means no rescue attempt begins until someone eventually notices that person is simply missing, sometimes hours later at a cabin check or a muster count. So let's break down what happens in the version where someone does see it happen, because this is where the real system kicks in, and it moves fast. The moment a crew member confirms a person has gone overboard, the bridge issues an internal alert, historically referred to as Code Oscar, a coded announcement that avoids alarming passengers while immediately mobilizing every relevant department on board. The officer of the watch marks the vessel's exact GPS position at the instant of the fall, because that single coordinate becomes the anchor point for the entire search. Everything that follows is calculated relative to it. Here's the deeper mechanical piece most people have never heard of. The ship doesn't simply turn around and retrace its path, because by the time it stops, it's already traveled a significant distance forward, and simply reversing course would put the vessel on a completely different track than the person floating behind it. Instead, bridge officers execute a maneuver called a Williamson turn, a specific sequence of rudder and heading changes that brings the ship back onto its exact original path, but now traveling in the opposite direction, precisely retracing the wake it just created. This isn't improvisation. It's a standardized maritime recovery maneuver taught specifically because a ship's momentum makes a simple U-turn dangerously imprecise for exactly this kind of search. While the ship is repositioning, additional systems activate. Life buoys equipped with strobe lights and smoke markers can be deployed from the exact point of the fall to help mark the location for search crews. Spotters are posted at multiple points along the ship, scanning the water with binoculars. Nearby vessels are notified through maritime distress channels, and depending on the ship's location, Coast Guard or military search and rescue units are alerted and may deploy aircraft. This is exactly what happened in that 2018 Adriatic case. A search vessel was dispatched, and the passenger was eventually spotted only because she had enough energy left to wave. That detail matters more than it seems, because it leads directly into the part of this system that technology and procedure can't fully solve: physiology. Once someone is in the water, survival becomes a race against exposure, not just drowning. In water around 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly the temperature of many popular cruise regions, the average person has somewhere between 3 and 12 hours before exhaustion or unconsciousness sets in, depending on body composition, movement, and whether they're wearing anything that traps air or provides flotation. In colder water, that window shrinks dramatically, sometimes to under an hour. This is why the location and timing of a fall, day or night, warm sea or cold, calm swell or rough chop, changes the entire probability of survival independent of how fast or well organized the ship's response is. Now here's the edge case that reveals the real limitation of this entire system, and it's not mechanical, it's human. According to Kelly's own research into incidents over more than a decade, every single documented overboard case where the cause could be determined was found to be either intentional or the result of reckless behavior, climbing on railings, sitting on balconies, attempting a dangerous stunt, not an accidental slip during normal ship operation. That statistic reframes this entire video. The engineering, the Williamson turn, the detection cameras, the Code Oscar protocol exist as a response system for something that overwhelmingly does not happen by pure accident. The railings themselves are deliberately built above the average adult's center of gravity specifically to make an unintentional fall during ordinary movement essentially impossible. In practice, this means the actual failure point in most overboard cases isn't the ship's response system at all. It's the roughly 90 seconds to several minutes between the moment someone goes over and the moment anyone realizes it happened, if anyone realizes it at all. On a ship with no witness and no advanced detection coverage, that gap can stretch to hours, and by then, the ship may be dozens of miles further along its route than the exact GPS point marked when a delayed alarm is finally raised, dramatically expanding the search area rescuers actually have to cover. So this isn't really a story about whether a ship can find you. It's a story about the seconds before anyone even knows to look, and the extraordinary difference between a ship that reacts immediately at 2 a.m. and a ship that doesn't realize someone's missing until a lifeboat drill head count the next morning. So the real question was never whether cruise ships have a rescue system. They do, and it's precise, well-drilled, and genuinely effective when it activates in time. The real question is how long it takes for that system to even begin, and that gap is almost entirely determined by something no amount of engineering can fully guarantee, whether anyone was watching. But going overboard isn't the only scenario where every second before detection determines the outcome. What happens when the danger isn't a person in the water, but a fire breaking out somewhere deep inside the ship itself, with thousands of people still on board? I've broken that exact protocol down in another video.
In 2018, a passenger fell from a cruise ship into the Adriatic Sea just before midnight, alone, with no one watching. She wasn't found until the next morning, floating nearly 60 miles from where she went in, 10 hours, in open water, at night, and she survived. That single fact should terrify you more than it should reassure you, because for every story like hers, there are far more that end in silence. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happens, procedurally, the moment someone goes overboard from a cruise ship, and by the end of this, you'll understand why the outcome depends on something almost no passenger ever thinks about: how long it takes anyone to even notice you're gone. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. On most cruise ships, if you go over the railing and nobody sees it happen, the ship does not stop. It doesn't slow down. In many cases, it doesn't even know. A ship moving at 20 knots covers roughly half a nautical mile every 90 seconds. So by the time anyone realizes something is wrong, if anyone realizes at all, the vessel could already be miles away, and turning a ship that size around isn't like turning a car. That's the real premise of this entire video, and we'll come back to exactly how far a ship actually drifts before rescue.